In February 1938, the United States Navy put out a request for a new single-engine fighter. The minimum requirements were as follows. The stalling speed cannot be higher than 70 miles per hour, a range of 1,000 miles minimum, and hold an armament of at least 4 guns. A few months later, in June 1938, the Navy would sign a contract with Vought in order to manufacture a prototype. The design team for the prototype was led by Rex Beisel. Construction of the prototype XF4U-1 would commence in February 1939. The Corsair came powered by a Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine with 18 cylinders producing over 1,800 horsepower, with the Corsair being the first airframe designed from the start to utilize the double wasp engine. It meant the Corsair had the largest engine and propeller ever fitted to a naval aircraft at the time. On the 29th of May 1940, the Corsair became the first U.S. single-engine fighter aircraft to fly over 400 miles per hour. The powerful Pratt & Whitney engine, combined with the large wings of the Corsair, gave it an excellent climb rate. However, as good as the prototype was, there was a few flaws that caused delays in production. The first issue was during diving. When speeds of up to 550 miles per hour were achieved, it would cause damage to control surfaces and access panels. The second major issue was the spin recovery standards. It was found that it was impossible for the Corsair to meet the required spin recovery of 2 turns without the use of an anti-spin chute. Thus, the requirements had to be altered, causing delays. Finally, the armament was adjusted, with reports from Europe stating 2 .30 calibers and 2 .50 caliber machine guns were inadequate. The Corsair's armament would be upgraded to 6 .50 caliber machine guns. The Navy would begin test trials for the XF4U-1 in February 1941. With the prototype impressing the Navy, they entered into a letter of intent on March 3, 1941. Not long after, on April 2nd, the Navy awarded Vought a contract for 584 F4U-1 fighters, which were given the name Corsair. The name Corsair was inherited from the 1920s Vought O2U Naval Scout biplane. 1 year after the contract was signed, the first production Corsair performed its maiden flight on the 24th of June, 1942. The Corsair would get its iconic gull-style wings when engineers were testing the retractable landing gear. In order to comply with the wings being able to fold up as well, the engineers decided on gull wings because they couldn't make the landing gear struts long enough to provide ground clearance for the large Hamilton Standard hydromatic 3-bladed propeller. The aerodynamics of the Corsair were an advance from the contemporary naval fighters. It was the first U.S. Navy aircraft to have retractable landing gear that would be fully enclosed. The fully enclosed landing gear would leave the Corsair's wings streamlined. The large panel pieces of the fuselage were made out of aluminum and were attached to the frame using a new technique called spot welding. This new welding technology allowed for the removal of rivets for the most part. While the Corsair would use this new technology, it would be the last American fighter to use fabric as skinning on the top and bottom of the outer wing portions. While the Corsair was streamlined and could fly at high speeds, it could fly slow enough for carrier landings, with full flap deployment of 50 degrees. The Corsair was intended to be a carrier-based fighter for the Navy. However, with the United States' entry into World War II, the Navy decided to keep using the contemporary F-6F Hellcat. The Navy made this decision on the basis of them wanting a standardized naval fighter. The Hellcat was much simpler to construct and was easier to fly for novice Navy pilots. As a result of the Navy selecting the Hellcat over the Corsair, the Marines would take on the Corsair, launched from air bases. The Corsair wouldn't be deployed on carriers until 1944. By then, all of the issues the Corsair had during carrier landings had been solved by the British, as they used them in the Royal Navy. The Corsair would make its debut combat operation with the Marines. On the 14th of February 1943, the fresh Corsairs partnered with P-38s and P-40s in escorting a flight of B-24 Liberators. Their mission was to strike a Japanese airfield at Kahili. The Japanese were keen on protecting the airfield. They fiercely contested the flight of American planes, with the Japanese dealing a heavy blow and putting the Corsair off to a rocky start. The United States lost 10 aircraft in the operation, 2 of them being the newly adopted Corsair, while the Japanese only lost 4 Zeros, not helping the already tough start for the Corsair. The only Zero downed by a Corsair in the operation was due to a mid-air collision. The Marines wouldn't be offset by the disastrous start. They quickly learned to make better use of the Corsair, and by May 1943 they gained the upper hand in demonstrating air superiority over the Japanese fighters. While becoming a potent fighter, the Marines would exploit the Corsair's capabilities and put it to use as a fighter-bomber in the close air support role. The Corsair managed to carry 4,000 pounds of bombs. It could also carry rockets and napalm. By 1945, the Corsair's unintended role as a fighter-bomber would prove vital in the fighting for Palaus, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. By the end of World War II, the Corsair would fly a total of 64,051 operational sorties with the US Navy and Marines. Only 9,581 of the sorties were launched from carrier decks. The Corsair claimed a total of 2,140 aerial victories with 189 losses to enemy aircraft, giving the Corsair a kill ratio of 11-1. This gave the Corsair the lowest loss rate of any fighter in the Pacific theater, but considering a substantial amount of its use was as a fighter bomber, it reduced the amount of encounters with the enemy aircraft. The Corsair is an impressive and versatile aircraft, which served many nations over several conflicts. Over 12,000 Corsairs were produced by Vought, Goodyear, and Brewster. As of now, there are about 50 Corsairs left. Some are under restoration, others still flying, and some are on static display in museums.